Again, we find ourselves back on Calvary, and again, this is station number 11, where Jesus was nailed to the cross. You'll notice again that this is a very unlit area, very dark, and therefore difficult to film. So this is station number 11. Jesus was nailed to the cross. Right next door to station number 11, because obviously these things happen close to each other, is station number 12, and this is the area where you can actually feel the spot where the cross stood. You can see a very, very dark area underneath here next to those two light areas, or in between, and there is a hole in the floor where you can actually put your hand through and feel the actual ground where the cross stood. When Jesus died, the rocks split open in an earthquake, and these are the rocks, and you can see how they have been split open. These events, of course, almost 2,000 years ago. This is station number 12. And of course, station number 13 is also here, where Jesus was taken down from the cross. So this would be station number 12 and number 13 together. Station number 14, of course, we've already seen, where Jesus was laid to rest in the tomb. Again, it's very dark, but it's very important to see. You can see there was someone just coming through there. This is the hole. It's very dark. It's very difficult to see, but you can see it in the other section where I have a slide that shows this area. Crosses, like the ones that would be carried through the streets at Easter time. Then we head back outside. It's very dark inside this church. Everything is not very well illuminated. There's not a lot you can do about that. And again, it's very quiet because all the markets are closed. Of course, there are still people allowed to come in. But once the markets close, many people don't come in the afternoon. And a mosque right outside. Hotel now. Again, we pass by the YMCA. Right opposite the King David Hotel. So it's now almost 3 hours later. And we are again on King David Street. And this time we'll take a shortcut back to the hotel.
Personalities from the Old Testament are relevant to Islam, who accept the Old Testament and are regarded as prophets in some form or other. The Muslims of Saudi Arabia see themselves descendants of the Ishmaelites, Ishmael being the second son of Abraham, the first patriarch. Now, if you remember the marriage of Jacob, I think he saw beautiful Rachel going to take water from the wells, fell in love with her, went to ask her hand from her father, and he said, well, you'll have to work 7 years for me, which he did. But when he got married according to local tradition and customs of the land, which means that the woman was veiled. Till today, in Judaism, women are veiled when they get married. But unfortunately, he said, yes, 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 I take thee 3 times over, before verifying who was behind the veil, and I think he found that it was tricked by his father-in-law. He only married the elder sister, and then he had to work for another 7 years to marry Rachel. That's why nowadays, if you attend a Jewish wedding, the woman is still veiled, but just before saying yes, you make sure you know what you get, as it's been pointed out here. You verify. Bethlehem itself has always served as a pilgrim city or town to large amounts of pilgrims coming to this region, and they obviously do produce quite an amount of souvenirs that you'll have seen already around the markets of Jerusalem, mainly olive wood production, blown glass, plates, clay plates or ceramic plates produced around the area. About 30,000 people in Bethlehem, half of them would be Christian. I'd say most of them Christian, but around Bethlehem you'd have quite a few Muslim villages and in fact refugee camps. That's where the percentage of Muslims, Christians equalises itself.
So this is Manger Square in Bethlehem.
Anyway, Manger Square itself is where a lot of the festivities take place, but usually the services are transmitted from what's known as St. Catherine's Church. There are two main churches here, Church of the Nativity, one belonging to the Latins, Catholics, and the other divided between Greek Orthodox, Latins, and Armenians. The monastery itself, behind us over there, was built in the 12th century during the Crusader period, whereas the Church of the Nativity that we'll be going into was built in the 5th century of Christian era, the 6th century, above an earlier long one built in the 4th century. The entrances, we can see, have been changed over the year, as we would have had initially what would have been a sort of round entrance, became a square one in the 5th century. In later years it became Crusader period, a much smaller one. Can you see it with that Gothic arc over there? And finally, in the last century, we've got that very small entrance, and we'll obviously be wondering why. Well, the reason is during the Ottoman period here, the church was not very, very well respected, and it became virtually fruit and vegetable market. So that was to stop donkeys laden or horses laden with vegetables going into the place. During the Crusader period, it would have served as much a church as a place of protection. Crusaders always lived, well protected inside their strongholds. So once again, the entrance was going to be much smaller than now. And they went to hide in what's known as the milk bunker nearby, because King Herod is quite concerned that, someone was born who would take over his position as king, and he brought out a decree that any young person under the age of 2 who was born will have to lose his life. So the Holy Family hid and then fled to Egypt. For about 3 years after that period, King Herod died, then his sons took over, and the family decided to stay discreet and move up towards the Galilee, towards Nazareth, and not stay in the region of Judah around. It's marked that the shepherds saw those 3 stars coming in that announced about the birth of the kingdom, the birth of the Messiah. And I did an educational tour recently with a Roman Catholic priest, in fact, and he reckons that, you know, the years of, you know, year one Christian era does not exactly fit in with the, you know, the archaeology of the time, the history of the time, and he would prefer to take it much further back and say that, well, Jesus was in fact born in the year 12 BC. It fits much more in with, you know, King Herod's reign during that region. So thereby, 3 years later, would have been the year 9 BC when they reached it. Now, what happened, in particular in the year 12 BC, we all remember, don't we?
Sure.
Went about, yes.
Sure.
Right. Well, you remember what happened,
like
a couple of international phenomena that happened a couple of years ago called Halley's Comet, which comes over a cycle of periods. Well, according to this priest, this is, you know, horse's mouth, as they say, well, you know, chronologically, the year 12 BC would be the year that Halley's Comet would have been floating around and could have been well seen in the, you know, clear, cold nights of winter. You know, was it 3 stars or was it this sort of halo coming up? Well, you know, as I said, now the writer of the Nativity really was the entrances here. It's a whole system of grottos. The entrances over here. But in the last century, due to this large amount of pilgrim dimensions coming from Russia, they found it easier to close here, open one side and open the other side. That way you know, you could have a flow of people going in and coming out. Just at the moment, it's very quiet around here. Normally speaking, especially Easter, it does make it very, very much easier for pilgrims coming to visit the place. It is a Greek Orthodox church built like a basilica. What is a basilica? It all in Greece. A rectangle thing. We all know, we've all been to the Acropolis in Greece and seen
Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem.
Well, morning services can take quite a while here because, you know, you've got first the Greek Orthodox, then the Latins, then the Armenians waiting outside saying, well, how come they're taking so long? You know, it's about it's our turn. The Armenian chapel, we'll see it on the way out, it's just on the other side, it's not, you know, on the other nave from the other side. The Latins have set up a chapel down here, but mainly the larger church, St. Catherine's Church on the other side.
Amen, amen, ascenses, de te voi capi, che se ben beati, che se spavon ciano, a me gada che se vogna. Bana çekiyor, sabah çekiyor, bak ya, bak ya, sen yazıyor, su faturu, su su barbadan kaçıyor. Bir biraz abiya, hele bana ne bu düşünüyorum. Anjana vol ya, bu kam para var, sizin doğru mu çıkıyor? Ağacım yemiş, var bir yan sanırım. O camiye, boşver beyan. Osman Yevger yevişim ses, tüm tamenisyen var.
Okay, meine Gruppe. Just down top.
The Armenians having a chapel on the right, both the Armenians and the Orthodox have access to the place of the Nativity, which is marked by 14-star below there. The two small chapels here where the Latins say their services. On the left is for the three wise men, On the right is where the manger, where the baby Jesus was placed. In the place of Nativity.
Where's that at? Where? Down here.
غادي الشمس ما بتحكيش انا كان ما بفكر غادي الشمس بتقول يعني.
So that was inside the cave where Jesus was born.
Orthodox or Armenian tradition. I think when I say Greek Orthodox or Armenian, it's Jewish the same. Jewish Eastern people who tend to have these, lights burning in oil, okay? Oil wicks. So the service itself is Armenian. This is their chapel. The 14 stars represents either the 14 generations from Adam to David or 14 generations from David to Jesus. In fact, over the placement and taking away of that star in the middle of the last century, I think, once again there was an issue between the Latins and the Greek Orthodox over the matter. I think the Turks took the star away, the Greek Orthodox wanted it, you know how it goes. But anyway, that led about to the Crimean War. So things are, really have to be, are delicate here, and that's the main reason instead that, nothing is really be done, because this wall belongs to me and that wall belongs to you.
Those holes with the stars?
No, the star was at the very bottom. There was a grotto.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, the hole itself was really to pull up and pull down those lanterns.
Yeah, but there were holes in the wall.
Not it, I know, and that was for the strings to pull up and pull down the lanterns were to like the wicks.
Some of them were strong in there. All right.
Well, I think we should, we've got a day ahead of us, so we'll try and...
Yeah, definitely where they think the activity is.
More and more places. And so lots of events in Jesus' life, we see more than one place that they bury commandments on 200 years. Well, 200 or 300 years in fact, after the death of Jesus, that we will build the shrine. I did mention that when the Crusaders arrived, they built a separate church to themselves with, definitely Crusader style, a basilica. Usually Crusader basilicas are always on a smaller scale than the Byzantine. You can see how that form with the cross on the ceiling. We'll continue to see that in Acco, Caesarea, various places. It's called Crusader form of style, but it was obviously renovated just this century, and again the Vatican is very wealthy and spends on it. The guardians of the site, the Holy Sepulchre and Holy Land side of the Vatican are the Franciscans, so normally these places would be run by Franciscans. And outside you've got a cloister, a very beautiful cloister. If you Well, here is just a picture. I told you that the cave itself was sort of a complex of caves. So down there there's yet another cave, which is marked as a place where St. Jerome translated the New Testament from Greek into Latin. He spent, say, 35 latter years of his life here in Bethlehem, and here's where he translated the scripts. There's a statue of him up here, Saint Hieronymus. You can also see one of these Middle Eastern pine trees, which seems to have a star at the top of it. I think that's where the star hits the pine trees at Christmas. I think Christmas in Europe. 12th century Crusader Christmas, so quite beautiful. And that's more or less it for the holy points of Bethlehem. Obviously around Bethlehem you've got quite a few churches. Just to say, I get, you see, let's put it this way, as far as I understand, some of them are for the senior citizens, whereby they'll have many rams, they'll have pharmacies within the neighbourhood, they'll have medical assistance or whatever is required, and senior citizen clubs, obviously. Whereas others of these neighbourhoods cater for young couples with all both the maternity facilities within the neighbourhood and obviously kindergarten, childcare and any other facilities required by the younger families. Now, I also mentioned that the railway line divided the southern and eastern Jerusalem with West Jerusalem. We'll be crossing it soon over a bridge. So this particular Arab village that we can see here, individual homes that normally don't have roofs because as the family grows, then they erect a second and third story because the extended family of 2 or 3 generations within will live within the same household plot. And this is a particular village that was divided in two, as I mentioned, by the railway line that we'll be crossing over a bridge a bit further up as we re-enter West Jerusalem and the low-cost housing built during the 1950s. Obviously today it's really difficult to identify this border that was existed for 19 years between 1948 and 1967. You'll be able to see above all these houses these water tanks because with reflectors it gives hot water for the whole day for family use and saves about 10% of the energy costs of the country. These are on the older housing. On the newer housing it's compulsory to integrate it as part of the building, so they're a bit less obvious, but they're all there. Yes, that's, art. Or trees that were cut off. They never were able to reach maturehood, adulthood. Their life was cut due due to the events that occurred in that period.
Well, this is just outside the Holocaust Memorial. We just walked through the children's, and of course you can't take photographs in there. It's very impressive with candles and mirrors. And as you walk through, you hear the names of all the children and where they came from that were killed. These trees were planted by people who died or who are still living, or their families who tried to help the Jews during the war. Each of them comes with a little plaque. And there's Jerusalem in the background.
One of the decrees by the Nazis was that all Jews wear yellow stars, but when it was put forward in Denmark, everybody, including the king, wore these yellow stars, so it cancelled the, the purpose really for the Germans. I think the whole Danish nation, wanted a tree planted their name and honour, a tree in the honour of the Norwegian resistance, and one of the trees that was planted recently is in the name of Raoul Wallenberg, who, well, we're still not sure if he's dead or not, but once, it was assumed that he was dead, then it was planted. You've already heard people mention the story. He was a Swedish diplomat in Hungary, and towards the end of the war, he helped smuggle out through Red Cross ambulances about 30,000 people from Hungary to Sweden. And after the war, he just disappeared. People believe that he either spent a long time or died or was killed or anything else in the Russian concentration camp. Well, not concentration camp, but labour camp. Somewhere in Siberia, we don't really know the truth of the story.
And there's no explanation of why the Russians picked him up.
Well, when you say the Russians, once again, you're talking about authority, and you don't know which individual did it. It's not, it wasn't necessarily a Stalinist policy. It was just, an individual officer. A story that we don't know. But anyway, until very...
So here we are in the Holocaust Museum. And it traces the story of the Holocaust and, of course, the beginnings of Israel as a state.
flourishing. So these are pieces that work where there's 3 workers in one team. That's what they title it.
Where was the trench then?
This is a concentration. That was just
Here's the game. This is from
Always have to do it with color. Yeah. Whatever we find jumps.
Well, you've got blue and red.
So it's got a pink
So
purple.
they make a hat.
It's cute like this.
Nice.
Nice color. So why don't you let your hair down and you put it up, then I would know the difference better.
Inside, it just came out. And it's built mainly so that something like the Holocaust will never happen again. Again, these trees are planted by the families or the people themselves who helped the Jews escape or tried to escape. Some of these people, of course, who were non-Jews died, and then a tree was planted in their place. And those who were still alive were invited here to plant a tree.
They're 4-year-old kids, Jessica. I'm telling you. I said.
Nora, just outside the Knesset.
If you'd like to come to the shade, I think when the other group will leave, we'll have a better chance of photographs. You can join us to the shade. When the group leaves, we'll have a better chance of photographs.
And that is the Knesset, the Parliament buildings of Jerusalem.
Walked out 10 years ago, made by the prophet Nehemiah, the scribe Ezra, settled in Ziph, with just below that the tables of the law from Sinai, below that Ruth the Moabite, who is supposed to be the grandmother of King David. She left the nation to follow the laws of the Jewish nation, and people who do become Jewish, obviously it's not a missionary religion, but who do become Jewish have definitely, or accept the rigors of Jewish religion, have got a special position in Judaism. Obviously, following that, we've got memorial to the Holocaust, and after that, the War of Independence, with below that, well, that round is just a prayer from the Old Testament, and just below that, pioneering and the rebuilding of the land. A lot of prophets are depicted there, for instance, on the left-hand side, that's the prophecy of Isaiah, where we'll have the lamb living with the lion, together all in peace. Other things that we've noticed, well, I did point out King David on the third one along, things that we know about. Oh, can we see that little boy on the second one, before the end on the top, standing on one leg? We all know who that is, don't we? Well, that's Hillel the Sage, the second one. Okay? The top second one, we've got a little boy standing on the left.
Oh.
Because a non-Jew came up to Hillel the Sage and told him, well, tell me, what are the basics of Judaism, and standing on one leg, and the answer was, well, don't do unto others what you don't want done unto yourselves. Thereby, presenting morality as a basis for Jewish religion, and this often is interpreted by these, ununderstandable Jewish laws that include it. For instance, we don't eat meat with milk. Well, that is, the morality of not cooking sheep in the milk of our mother, and things like that. Basically, it's a certain moral religion. It also, for instance, makes us understand that, well, if you do eat meat, then you have to wait 6 hours before eating milk, so you think twice before eating meat at a time. It gives you an interpretation of morals, vegetarianism, or any other things. Should I say?
Is photographing allowed in the museum?
Photographing is not allowed in the museum.
There's no photography allowed inside. It starts over there on the top and goes down successively as you go down the hill. We'll be going in about half an hour, right after lunchtime. The children's section of the museum. In this area there's an archaeological museum and everything else. It's all concentrated here together. And they're being kept down there, and again there's no photography allowed inside. But they're in this kind of urn shape. And they're kept on the right temperature and everything else. From that was used to make the cross.
Pardon?
So this is now a monastery.
Are given as donations by the Hadassah movement of the United States, a women's Jewish movement that does quite a lot of fundraising for the benefit of that particular hospital. Now, the Hadassah Hospital, as I mentioned, the first one was on Mount Scopus, but then when that was encircled and we didn't have access to it, we built one in West Jerusalem when we'll be visiting. The hospital here on our left is Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, and that's a religious hospital that cater for the needs of the religious community of Jerusalem, the ultra-Orthodox who require and request special attention to their dietary houses, to schools and kindergartens. All the town would have limited, the number of people wanting to come. Like that, it was all organised, all set up. A large proportion of the settlers identified already, and within a month or so we had a thriving town. From 1975 onwards, about 10,000 people that live in that town up there. Housing is very much lower than in Jerusalem. Especially in the 70s, there was pressure on housing in Jerusalem, which was very expensive, and houses here were virtually 50% lower, with subsidies and whatnot. So that was an important incentive. Today it's probably gone down to a third lower than in Jerusalem. In terms of it, it's probably one of the only successful towns in what is known as the West Bank, because it's been built it's not been built within populated areas, because the main problems, the main issues of Jewish settlers in the West Bank is where they live and settle in Arab populated residential areas, and then there's competition for the resources around, the land, the water, and other things like access roads. left of, well, some form of crusader fortifications that used to be on the main highway up here on the hills. Soon afterwards we'll be continuing on the route that was built by Americans in 1966, and just, Israel, bearing in mind that in 1967 Israel took over this region and it was available for Israel. But what we will do every Friday afternoon, I'm not sure if it's 2 or 3, you see, it may change between summer and winter time, there is a procession down the Via Dolorosa that stops at all the chapels that we stopped off that were not open. Is it worthwhile? I think it's something to do on Saturday afternoon. It'd be quite interesting. You don't have to follow the whole of the route, but it may be interesting to begin the route with them. And yes.
Now you said Saturday. This says Friday.
Sorry.
This book says Friday, and you said Saturday. Do you know which? The book refers to it as happening on Friday.
No, on Friday, sorry, I forget. Yes, it is on Friday between 2 or 3 o'clock. I think I also mentioned it on, on the route as we did it, that the chapels will be open then. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can do, is I would say, you can do a good part of that route on Friday afternoon and then leave the old city, not through the Jaffa Gate, but through the Damascus Gate. I really think the Damascus Gate area is worth a visit, either in the morning when it's very busy, only watch out for pickpockets when it gets extremely crammed, and Friday afternoon, if that's when you happen to be there, just to see the architecture of the area, go out to the Damascus Gate, and from there you can walk up to Me'a Sha'arim, okay? The religious quarter. From there it's easier access than from the Jaffa Gate region, which is much further away. Can anybody remind me what happened to Moses from the Bible? Sorry? Well, towards the end of his life, where did he end his testament? But soon coming up, we'll see a large signpost saying Nabi Musa, the prophet Moses, to the right. And we'll look in the distance and see a form of a complex, which is both a tombstone, a shrine, and a sort of as we get to this junction over here, we can already see Nabi Musa on the sign, the Prophet Moses, and a bit further up in the distance, here we can see it. Can you see that large shrine over there?
No.
Well, yes, that's a very big complex.
Over there?
That's a very big complex, as you can see.
Want me to try to get you? Oops. Can you?
Married, which doesn't get ruled, was by being, by mediating well between the groups in the area, and that way they were, people were pleased with their rule. They were very good administrators. So they had a problem. After the Crusader period, the Christians would come into Jerusalem on large numbers on pilgrimages over Easter, and there'd be intercommunal rivalry between them and the Muslims. So what they did, the Mamluks, is they created, well, first they built this complex and created this week-long festival for the death of Nabi Musa. Half of Jerusalem came down to this festival, and when I said they created it, they probably, for the first few years on the house, they were giving, the food. Well, the accommodation and food was all available. Large numbers of Muslims come out of Jerusalem from here, and during the Easter, which allows for less tension within the old city of Jerusalem, and that way the Mamluks kept on ruling for quite a long time with peace in their region. Well, we've just come down into this fertile valley of Jericho, which we'll be seeing on our left. We'll be entering Jericho from the Roman route through the hills, coming down there on Saturday morning for our visit. The Saturday parchments of the Dead Sea that we visited yesterday. As the story goes, there was this little Bedouin who was seeking for his sheep and heard him, crying for help. He disappeared into one of those caves. Presumably the cave would have been closed by large stones and boulders, and he found his way into there in some form, reason or other. So this little Bedouin threw at a stone and heard a big plop of one of these urns that we saw yesterday breaking. He was quite afraid, ran away, came back the next day with his cousin. They climbed in, and it is there that they found these 50 different urns with the parchments in them. It's quite, I mean, from here you can see on the one hand how close it is to the main highway, but on the other hand we can understand how inaccessible those particular caves were as opposed to caves on the hills around us, on those browner hills. The Essene community would have lived on this side of the cliffs, above these white cliffs. The ones over there, as I said, being on the main highway, but still, for some odd reason, for 2,000 years, nobody reached them, and only just recently were they reached, the parchments uncovered, and they're, opened to the public and preserved, for eternity as part of the history of the Jewish nation. They said that what they could do is no problem, they could do something else. So what they could do is pay the hotel, they'll have to pay the full day. I hope you've all got walking shoes with you. We will be taking the cable car. Everybody's coming with, I assume, yes? Okay.
We're now at the cable cars that will take us to the top of Masada. Judean desert, and here we have some natural sand formations, rock and sand formations caused by the wind. The Dead Sea is just beyond here. And of course, rising out of the desert here is the hill of Masada. There are two ways up, by cable car, which is the way that we're going, or you could also do what those people are doing up there. You can walk up. It rises 300 meters above the Dead Sea, which is approximately 100 meters above sea level. We're now about 200 meters below sea level. It's early in the morning and it's already very hot. there goes the cable car. Of course, there's one coming down and one going up. Beyond that, you can see people who are walking down.
We do. We come here in the afternoon, so when we leave at 4 to run down.
You wanted to come at 8.
I wanted to come at 2 o'clock in the morning, so I'd be here from the morning. And you can walk up and
Well, I can arrange it for you tomorrow morning if you insist. You know, the youth hostel up here.
You'll have to guide us though, Isaac. You have to be a tour guide. We can keep him up all
Actually,
night.
I can't count the number of times I've run down, but I don't remember the last time I walked up. But next Saturday morning I'm going to walk up at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. I've got well, I started the group. It's a French pilgrim group. I did a couple of days with them. I took your group on and I'll be completing them and finish with you.
Will you still be with us Saturday?
Yeah, it's the following week Saturday.
Oh, so Isaac will come with you.
yeah.
Oh, that breeze is nice. I've been real good so far. Made it out here.
They walking up, are they?
It's just nice that look at that. The breeze is just nice.
One of those kind of.
Yeah.
I love heights. The higher the better. Oh, yes.
Someone said that Madison is just now getting to it. It took an hour or so.
You could rent that.
So here we are on the top of Masada.
That is opposite the tongue of the Dead Sea. You see, now the southern end was just well, up until 10 years ago, you can really see the dividing line. Beyond that canal, there's a sort of a ridge. The Dead Sea would have been linked up together. The southern end would have been 50 metres deep. At the moment, it's about 10 metres deep. And that's where the Dead Sea works occur, because I said in 1948, when the En-Gedi was the most northern section, this would have been the West Bank up to Jerusalem. The Dead Sea works were taken down further south. Now, I was asked on the coach regarding the canal of the two seas. This is something, a concept that was developed by the British in the 1930s already, when they had started the extraction of minerals from the northern Dead Sea, the northern end of the Dead Sea. What the idea was, well, okay, we've got the Dead Sea, we've got the minerals, but we are far away from the centre of the country, and energy is expensive. Moses got it all wrong. He brought us to the Holy Land, which have got all the geographical formations of to find oil, but we don't have oil here. We do have a bit of natural gas not too far from here. So we can't obviously have significant hydraulic power because there's no water. So the idea was that we dig a canal and tunnels from the Mediterranean Sea. We pump the water slightly up to, on the southern end of the Judean hills, not more than 300 meters up. But then we've got a very steep decline of the 300 meters plus the other 400 meters down to the bottom of the Dead Sea over a very short distance, over 15 kilometers or less as the crow flies. So you can have over a 700 meters descent. You can have a series of turbines. You can have at least 10 of them. Every 70 meters you can have yet another one. And here you can have renewable energy for generations onwards. Once you've paid out for the initial outlay, you've got just large amount of energy, but sufficient amounts. It can only justify itself if it can be used by all the region, not when Israel's at the state of war and we can't share with Jordan and have a common project. That's on the one hand. Now on the other hand, obviously during a state of war there's always danger of the enemy bombing it for you. So that project was more or less put aside by the British because of the Second World War. Following the Second World War, we already had, unsure period, and the War of Independence started soon afterwards. And at a later stage, I said, in a state of war, you can't build such a grandiose program. No way. Now, about 35, 37 towers all around. The main gate is would always be at the weakest point, which is in the western section over there. Because over here it's 300 meters top to bottom, there is a snake path that comes up. From the southern or northern section there's no way up. From the western section about 60 meters up. The route that we'll be taking is virtually through the northern palace, the warehouses of King Herod, to the northern palace, through the synagogue, and along the western walls to the western palace, the western gate. You'll see a bit of the swimming pool, the water system, as I said, is at the far end, at the other end, so I don't think we'll be visiting it at this stage. Bearing in mind again that all this was built about the year 40 before Christian era, and as the descriptions go, all this area over here would have been an area of vegetable gardens, so that old King Herod could have, his fresh vegetables every day. And this is also the region where we'd have the water harvesting at prior periods to bring the water down to the bottom. Okay, we'll try and walk slowly to where. Well, the head of families killed their families, they drew lots, and 10 people killed 90 others. They drew lots, one person killed the 9 others and fell on his sword.
Where are these kids? Oh, I don't know.
Well, we can see one level and one bit level a bit further up. We can see that park. Now, all that would have been fed by water.
Het kleine beetje water die hier op de dam regent, willen ze opgevangen. En dan gaan ze hier vandaan naar boven. Dit is zo
Take a picture of them?
Of you.
Three of us?
Now I'm going to ask you to all stay together. What's important is that I don't wait with everyone under the sun for somebody or other. We can lose each other. Okay, so we'll try and go through explanations fairly efficiently. The bathhouse of the Northern Palace, not his personal one, which you had further down, we would have had a sort of a patio outside where we can have our afternoon tea. You can see some mosaic floor that's left over. This isn't the most beautiful one. The Western Palace is much more beautiful. And classic Roman baths just on the right here, a frigidarium, a cold water pool, before you go in to the main bathhouse, which is through here.
He says.
Wait, which one is renovated?
Just near the, you know, can you see those blue things?
Okay.
On the left of that you can see a large square, right? That's renovated, but beyond the buses on the far end you can see a large camp, and next to it a large camp, a wall thing all around.
These are all the storehouses and the Roman baths, etc.
Last deposit box is the more faded shade over there, the rooms behind us, which would have been the Hashmonaim palace, and renovated by King Herod. There were only 4 or 5 rooms, enough for 2 or 3 concubines, I presume, whilst his own family would have lived on the far side of the mountain. The second is built on 3 levels. This would have been a terrace, presumably covered. Down there we've got a circular room with an outer wall. We're not too sure why. Maybe it would have been for, once again, protection against invasion. Don't forget the outer there. Or maybe also so that no one knows King Herod's whereabouts, especially his 3 sons towards the end of his days. The bottom level, again, would have been a large terrace of many pillars around with frescoes all around. Those dotted lines, once again, 1 or 2 rooms and Roman baths for King Herod's personal use. If he happens to be at the bottom having a cup of tea with one of his concubines, he can just pop into the bath. So, oh. Now, first of all, synagogues only started to emerge about the century before the destruction of the temple. But they were normally, there was no organised place lasted for 3 years after the destruction of the temple, where the moment we no longer have the temple and sacrifices, then we start having the structured prayers, and that's why it becomes a synagogue. This was probably an administrative building from King Herod's period, only the seats would have been added on by the zealots and at a later stage and developed into a synagogue during the period that they were here. And each synagogue in the world has got a little cupboard in which, if we have any religious scriptures that are no longer kosher, that means have been a bit destroyed or misprinted or anything else, then we put them aside and they are buried according to religious rites in cemeteries, literally. But in the meantime, they're collected in a cupboard in a synagogue called a genizah. Now, for instance, the oldest religious scriptures that we had before finding those of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we found them in genizahs or cupboards in a synagogue in Egypt, where there was a myth that if you open up the cupboard, you know, out comes a ghost. So people never opened it up, and they were 1,000 years old. The genizah of this particular structure was down to the right there, where we found very similar parchments to that found in the Dead Sea. We all know what columbariums are, don't we?
We do. I have the foggiest notion.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it? It's a local post office.
Oh, the turtle.
You know why? Who were the postmen in those days? Sorry? Who were the postmen? They'd be very slow.
Oh, isn't that right?
No?
Pigeons.
Aha, which is in Latin, la colombe. Okay, and those little niches in there, they're not to put letters in, they're to put the little postman inside.
Oh, isn't that sweet?
Now, this isn't the only one. This, in fact, was probably renovated by the Byzantines, who were here for a small period and built a small church over there. Okay? The original one would have been further yonder, and I'll show it to you at a later stage from the distance.
Go ahead. I'm having a little trouble
Adrian's got this camera.
trying to focus here.
If you recall, well, most medieval towns will sort of have a pool where people, it's a social place and where people come and do their washing as well. Bearing in mind that there would have been, during King Herod's time, quite a large number of people up here. The officers, their wives, the soldiers, maybe their wives, the cleaning woman, I'm sure he had a clean shirt 3 times a day. Where would that have all been done? More than likely here, and as I said, at certain stages it could have been cleared out and served the function of a swimming pool. It could have, served either of these functions. If you do stand up here on the wall, I'm sure in the distance you can see those round, that columbarium with those little niches. Can you see it from where you're standing, or do you have to stand up? Can you see that just in the middle?
That one was the main one, or that one?
No, that would have been King Herod's original one. The other one is really a room in the wall which would have been adapted by the Byzantines at a later stage for their post office.
Go into details.
So she said to us, if we all concentrate very hard, then we will hear the spirits of the people who died here answer back. Comes like 3 seconds later.
Here we are, heading back down.
Find the why?
No, it's fine.
There wasn't enough room inside.
אין בן אדם אחד שסובל את זה. לא אצלכם, לא אצלנו. אין אף אחד שסובל את
Not yours.
Yeah, running.
People here now.
Yeah, crazy in this. Marilyn was walking, but the other.
So I take it for it. Hey, you're dusting.
Bottom of the hill of Masada. Some of our people are walking down. And this is where we just came from. There's the station, and then you have to walk up these steps to the very top. So this is Masada.
To the beach, as I said, you'll be seeing the black mud to cover all over you, so you may want to take your cameras with you just to take pictures of yourself black, all out in black. If anybody wants to rent a newspaper so that you can take a photo of yourself reading it, see the guide and he'll rent you his, even if it's in Hebrew.
Better. See what I learned in Israel.
No, the Bilk sell things on the further end of the Dead Sea, so we're not going down there to the bottom, no. What happens is that it does take much longer on hot days like today to see Masada. You see, you notice that we tried to take it as easy as we could. Normally speaking, when it's cooler, we can spend more time outside and people are more organised. Well, I'm not saying don't go in the Dead Sea with any gold, but if it's not pure gold, you'll find it turns black. And you may be upset either with your jeweler or your wife or your husband or anyone else, but don't worry, the black can be wiped off, okay?
Dead Sea, this is where you can go swimming or actually go floating because you will not sink. The idea is to lie down on your back, because if you should get water in your eyes, you'll have to get right out and wash it out because of all the minerals and the very salty water. So I'm walking towards the beach area, and this is one of the only places where you actually have to take a shower when you come out of the water instead of before you go in. We are floating in the water. We are 200 meters below sea level. This is the lowest place on Earth. No sand. We are in a desert, and the desert mountains are just on this side. We've just come from Masada, which is in that direction. This is all run by a kibbutz. You can see that they're trying to plant trees in the desert, and some of them are taking root. Apparently in ancient times, long before Christ, there were a lot of trees in this area. There are springs that are feeding the Dead Sea, and some of them are freshwater springs, and that's why some trees will grow here. There's somebody floating now, as you can see. Will not sink. The salt that comes out of the Dead Sea is poisonous. You can't use it as table salt or anything like that because it just has too many minerals in it, phosphorus and that kind of thing, that have to be removed. There's somebody else floating. I guess it's a great place to learn how to swim because you will not sink. So that's the Dead Sea. And then when you come out of the water, you walk over the rocks and you shower. A little bit more crowded now. That's because it's after lunch. And people are still going floating in the water. Very, very hot, but very dry, so you really don't sweat, because as soon as you begin to perspire, it evaporates right off your body, which is one of the reasons why you have to continually drink a lot of water. Regions like this, you carry water with you, and then you take a swallow of water every now and again. Some people walked down from Masada, and the first thing the guide said to one of the women who was having problems coming down is, first thing you do is you buy a liter of water and you drink a whole liter. And there we are, showering the salt off your body when you come out. So again, it's very rocky here. Last time I was here, one of the guides said if rocks had been gold, we'd be the richest country in the world. Because throughout this film, you'll see a lot of rocks. And apparently right now, some company from the States is around this area looking for oil. So perhaps someday they'll find oil here. They've already got natural gas. So walking towards the water now. Again, you can see how terribly rocky it is. And then people floating, of course, in the water. It's a great place to learn how to
swim and float. Yes.
You can't go down anyway.
No. No, it'd be ideal, wouldn't it? Wouldn't you get a shock though when you went to a normal pool? Bang, straight to the bottom.
You can see nobody has water wings.
No, well, lie down for climbing, eh?
No, they're not going to go down.
What was that then? Well, it's a full girls down, eh?
Right in front of us.
Yeah. Didn't say one in one class?
No, one. Yeah. Oh, right. It's waiting for you. There in the black and white. She's telling you to come in. I think they're on TV now, the others, look, rocking and rolling. I bet it's nice.
Oh, they have a look on the thing.
I think it's back there over here. There's Mum and Dad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right there. Oh, yeah, in the right top.
She's not in yet, though. No. Well, it can't be too warm. I don't know. You ask him. You don't know what yours and no, I don't.
That's
I see what they've got our shoes on. Not only that, it's all stones. You can walk.
Nice rocky beach. We are now on our way to En-Gedi Natural Reserve in the middle of the Judean desert.
ערב של שושנים נצא אל הבוסתן מור ושמים ולב עונה לרגלך מפתן לילה יורד להר ברוח שושן נושבה הלכה שלך שיר בלט זמר של אהבה לילה יורד להר ורוח שושן נושבה הלכה שלך שיר בלט זמר של אהבה שחר הומה יונה ראשך מלא תללים רבות Somayonna Roche Mare dell'Alli Michelaboker Shoshana Ektefein Ulli Laila Yored Lehar Veruach Shoshan Nosheva Hamba El Chashelach Shir Barat Zemmer Shel Ahava Zemmer Shel Ahava
Northeast here we have the spring. And so the climb continues. We're fed on this spring, of course.
No, you're not. I didn't stop hard. You're not doing that. Could have had a good fire out at that King Herod's thing today.
Oh, look what's happening here. Get out of the way.
So we continue our trek uphill. Keeps telling us 13 more steps. And here we are.
ها؟
Hey!
What about you? Oh.
This is such a mess we have to do. What happens when you smoke it? Here, Isaac, I'll take a picture of you. I read that book.
My turn.
And we continue our ride through the desert.
Hashem Yitzion, וראה בטוב ירושלים. יברכך השם מציון, כל ימי ימי חייך. ורבנים לבניך, שלום על ישראל. ורבנים לבניך, שלום על ישראל. ורבנים לבניך, שלום על
As we drive through the Judean desert, you will notice some houses that look like they are made out of skins, animal skins. They look like tents or houses. These belong to the desert dwellers, the Bedouins. We are now driving through the Judean desert on our way back to Jerusalem. As we arrive back in Jerusalem, you will notice that some of the homes have tanks on top of them with some kind of solar reflectors. This is to provide the family with hot water and therefore save on energy. Just watch the roofs and you'll see them.
Campus, and the hospital we see it a bit further ahead. Now, soon coming up on our right is the largest, most extensive hotel in Jerusalem, which was built on